We all know that in a democratic society, the people can choose governing officials through an equal election process. For example, we could look at the First Amendment of the United States of America's Constitution, because there's a presidential election going on this year there. So, the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. According to popular interpretations, freedom of speech can mean a number of different things, but it also extends to the right to vote. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this episode of The Law Enthusiasts. But you might be wondering, who exactly are allowed to vote? Well, if you're an American alive in 1789, you'd know that most states only allowed white men who owned property to vote. But good news is in 2024, as long as you're an American citizen who is over the age of 18, you are eligible to vote regardless of, your racial, religious, sexual, or socioeconomic background. Of course there are exceptions, but that's besides the point here. Now, here comes the fun part. Do you think corporations like McDonald's or Microsoft can vote? Pause the video if you need some time to think about it. Okay, so my answer is they can't exactly vote. And the reason why it's not a clear-cut answer like yes or no is because ever since the 1800s, the Supreme Court here has pretty consistently ruled corporations as persons. And by persons, I don't mean flesh and blood humans like we are, but legal persons. Now, a legal person is any non-human entity that could possess some rights such as the right to exercise free speech or the right to sign a contract. They can't vote like organic humans do, as in voting for an electoral college that represents them and so on and so forth. But as with all legal terms, the concept of free speech can be interpreted in a number of different ways. Corporations can still voice their political interests, but through the form of political donations, not voting. But what is political donation? Personally, I see political donation as a bit of an oxymoron. Because the word donation on its own, it means that it's an altruistic and a charitable act. You wouldn't, or at least I hope you wouldn't, expect a homeless person to reciprocate a favor that you did for them. But when it comes to politics, any economic transaction is incredibly calculated, and oftentimes it is motivated by a political agenda. So in essence, it seems like the word political and donations on their own don't really work together. But when you put them together, they are basically acts of giving away money and other in-kind resources such as press coverage with a political basis. If you think that political donations may be a little bit controversial, you are correct, because they are highly controversial, and even more so after we look at the Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commissions, or FEC for short, past precedent. So let's look at it. So, first of all, we need to know the historical context. So, from 1907 up until 2008, courts nationwide, and nationwide here is, as in America, have pretty consistently ruled in favor of limitations on how much a firm can donate to a political cause, due to the provision of the campaign finance regulation. It's kind of like putting a maximum price on something if you guys study economics. The price ceiling for political donations vary based on the donor and the recipients, but the limit stands at about less than $124,000. In 1971, Congress also passed the Federal Elections Campaign Act, which requires politicians to publicly disclose the amount of donations they receive to ensure transparency in a democratic election process. But things took a turn when Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were against each other in the race to become the Democratic nominee for the 2008 presidential election. You see, a company called Citizens United spent a whopping $1 million to make a movie talking bad about Clinton, which did not sit well with the FEC, which is basically an organization to police campaign spending. The plaintiff here, Citizens United, wanted to challenge the acts previously mentioned, limiting how much money they could donate. The case even reached the Supreme Court in 2010, and the majority of judges argued that this movie was just an exercise of the company's unalienable rights to free speech, as stated in the First Amendment, and ruling it as unconstitutional would mean that would be similar to silencing certain voices. But in dissent, Justice Stevens contended that this verdict would undermine the integrity of elected institutions across the nation, because basically what he's trying to say is that those with the most money would potentially have the loudest voice, and that directly clashes with the Democratic values, right? But ultimately, the court ruled in favor of Citizens United and nullified any monetary limits on political donations, which now means that corporations can spend as much or as little money as they'd like on ads, movies, and other political tools to indirectly support a cause. The key word here is indirectly, because they still cannot vote or send any money directly to political campaigns or candidates personally. So there you have it. Corporations, as a recap of today's episode. Corporations are not persons, but they are legal persons and therefore are entitled to free speech. They can't vote because they're not citizens, but they can spend unlimited potential political donations to indirectly support a campaign. The precedent, Citizens United versus FEC, along with, say, Roe v. Wade, are still highly controversial, even in the Supreme Court room, because the Citizens versus FEC case was ruled in a 5-4 decision, which is why I'd like to hear your take on this topic. So, do you think that corporations have the right to participate in political contexts? Or will political donations distort the democratic values? And if you think that political donations are acceptable, should corporations be capped on how much money they can donate? I'd love to hear your thoughts below, so please comment down in the comment section down below. But for now, thank you so much for listening to the 6th episode of The Law Enthusiasts. See you next time. Bye!